Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of CouncilMatters. I'm Nick Fitz and I am joined in the studio by yet another Councillor Michael O'Brien from the Anti-Austerity Alliance. Michael, welcome back again.
Thank you, Michael.
Michael, we will talk about this later, but I gather you're going to be a candidate in G16.
Absolutely,
in Dublin Bay North.
Yeah, well, we were psyched up for an election this month in November, but yeah, it'll be 2016.
Well, I can tell you that the phony campaign has already started, because as I walked down this morning from Fairview, notices of 2 meetings tonight, so clearly it's the politicians are taking an interest in our welfare. Well, Mark, I wanted to start off, in fact, if we could make this to a certain degree the theme of the programme, because it's not coming up as an election issue at all, which I think is is to our deficit, and that's the issue of workers' rights. Now, you raised an issue yesterday. I read a press release about the situation in the fishing industry. Can you tell us just a little bit about what is the backstory to that?
Well, just the backstory to begin with is that I've been a parliamentary assistant to Joe Higgins TD for a number of years, and within the Dáil I've kind of specialised around workers' rights issues before I was even a public rep. And we had approaches made to us by Ken Fleming, who was on the airwaves yesterday, who works for the International Transport Federation, which is like an umbrella kind of international group for the unions that organise in the transport and seafaring sectors. And he was bringing to our attention like the situation that he was aware of in Ireland of undocumented non-EU migrant workers who came in here via the UK, working on fishing vessels, extremely unsafe conditions, effectively slave labour at sea, and he was looking to find ways and means of having an amnesty or a period of reflection, as he termed it, so that they could make themselves known to the authorities and basically be looked after and treated in a similar sense that people that are trafficked here by the sex industry, and that people who are working in the fishing industry, who are working in terrible conditions, be given effectively some type of amnesty and be treated sympathetically by the state.
So who should this be coming under? Should this be coming under the Department of Employment? Or I heard Simon Coveney talk about it last night, and basically he seemed to be saying, well, don't blame me, even though I'm the Minister of Fisheries. There's Gardaí, there's transport, there's industry, there's a whole range of people involved. They seem to be passing the buck on it. Do we not have one single authority?
Well, we found ourselves having to fire parliamentary questions in around this 2.5 years ago to various departments, because as you say, it spans like workers' rights issues, so it was enterprise, trade and employment, but also in terms of residency type issues, so the Department of Justice have an input, and then fisheries comes under the Department of Agriculture. So I mean, what we brought to the public's attention yesterday with a press statement is that we put a particular question to Minister Bruton 2.5 years ago about the situation, and he gave a very perfunctory answer, not acknowledging that this is an issue. He said he was aware of the contention that there's undocumented migrants working in the fishing industry, but then he referred and attributed comments to Minister Shatter and the Department of Justice, saying that the Department of Justice didn't see it their duty to kind of intervene and basically look after the rights of people that shouldn't be here in the first place, which I just thought was a disgraceful answer. And it's unfortunate this has taken a further 2.5 years for this really to come to the public's notice and a response from Minister Coveney, as you say.
Yeah, correct me if I've interpreted this wrong, but what I've read and what I've heard and what I've seen suggested that the government we're seeing the issue from what I would call an administrative perspective, where they didn't have their permits or somebody didn't. If you change this the other way around and you do it from the perspective of a service culture, people seem to be having their rights walked all over. I'm not too sure that they were actually getting paid what the equivalent would have been for the industry. I'm certainly hearing that they were being housed in substandard accommodation. So if you look at it the other way, from the point of view, if you like, the client, it's been handled appallingly.
Yeah, and there was a humanitarian perspective on it as well, because it was in the aftermath of the T-Bonhomme tragedy in Union Hall,
yes,
where 5 Egyptian crewmen died. And there was reports done into that, but like an aspect of that whole case was just the unsafe conditions, faulty, safety equipment, training, rest times, like all this stuff about conditions of work. But they say the thing is that the way the fishing industry is organised, that it's often not done on a salaried basis, but you get a share of of what's caught, and therefore technically you're a stakeholder or
a partner, even if
a partner, self-employed, so to speak, which is a kind of a concept that plagues other branches of industry as well, like the construction industry and so on. That once you're so-called self-employed, even if you're dependent on a bigger, effectively, employer, you lose all sorts of rights and entitlements that you'd have as a PAYE employee.
Yeah. Can I, again, you would know more about this, Malcolm, than I would. Can I assume that the people are being brought in, not because they've got skills that our workers don't have, but because they're cheap?
Fundamentally, that's the case, and
is it a price issue when it comes down to a labour price? I
think so. It was debated out yesterday, and what other motivation would they have to try and recruit people from the other side of the world, from the Philippines or Egypt, to do this work? Because
let's be honest, it's not glamorous work.
It's not glamorous work. It's very dangerous work. But also, there's a vulnerability. Like many of these people, they surrender their passports to their employer. There's language barriers and so on and so forth, and they just don't know how to go about actually bringing their situation to the attention often to the authorities. But like Ken Fleming, I have to say, he's done pretty sterling work in actually kind of meeting people in these type of situations and helping them out. And as as I say, it's taken a while in the Guardian newspaper in the UK to.
Well, that was the other bit I was going to do. It's not really a great advertisement for what I would call the investigative skills of independent newspapers, of the Irish Times or RTE or any of these people.
No, it's a poor show, but the Guardian have a good track record. Like they similarly exposed the slave conditions in Qatar, on the World Cup stadium building sites where people have been dropping dead by the day, Nepalese and the Indian subcontinental workers. So the Guardian have done some good work, but that's kind of, they put like a year into this kind of these kind of investigations.
Oh yeah, it was a very good report. I read it at the beginning of the week.
And it doesn't seem that the Irish media doesn't seem to have the capacity or the inclination to kind of invest that amount of time into investigative reporting.
Well, based on what I saw last night on RTE, they seem to be a bit like the child abuse cases. Well, there weren't that many. One is too many in this instance. Would you agree, Malcolm?
I think so. Yeah, I heard some representatives from the industry like really kind of diminishing the scale of this. But I think
few bad apples sort of thing
that kind of thing. But I think anecdotally, like I think Ken Fleming would stand over the fact that it's rife in the industry, and that it's not really credible to deny that now.
Yeah. Moving on slightly, but can we assume that it is confined to the fishing industry, or would we suspect that it's actually happening in other areas too, whether it might be catering or any areas that are involved essentially in service?
Well, we've had that. Well, we had the example of Gamma as well 10 years ago in construction of.
I was going to say, is this the Turkish workers all over again?
There's a bit of that. In some ways, it's more severe because of just the hazardous nature of working at sea. The possibility of deaths. I know you have again people that are mushroom picking or fruit picking and as well, like can find themselves in these type of situations here in Britain. We've seen the likes as well. We had the example of the cockle pickers in Morecambe Bay. 19 of them drowned there a few years ago. So like it's the most dangerous type of work that people, undocumented migrants from outside the EU, can end up finding themselves in those situations. And
the assumption is that if you're prepared to do that for such poor returns in such dreadful conditions, your initial situation was probably not that great to start with.
I'd say so. I'd say the economic push factors must be incredible to to make it on work in those conditions.
And last but by no means least, I wonder, we heard an awful lot in the past, we seem to have again dealt with the problem militarily, that an awful lot of the Somalis who became pirates were because they were originally fishermen that were put out of business by a whole range of issues. If nothing else, it would be a nice humanitarian gesture to use their skills and perhaps give them some sort of asylum here. An interesting one, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the point is that like we're operating in a global capitalist situation, so like we see the consequences of wars, but also just the economic inequality, the unfair terms of trade, globally, and how, if you like, wealth comes from the so-called third world into the first world, and people inevitably follow that in order to get an income and a living for themselves. That's the reality, and until we have global system-wide change, that we're going to have to confront these situations.
Okay, moving on, Michael. The issue of workers' rights, which are, as I say, we wanted to have as central to the theme of today's programme. It's one thing to have workers' rights. It's another matter to actually enforce them, and that's what you've raised an issue on the North. Is it the North Central Area Committee about a situation up there? Now we have to be careful because some of it may be before a tribunal. But the issue of establishing workers' rights seems to me to be very one-sided. Before we go down that, can you tell us, within the constraints of what we could say, what was the background to you raising a motion for discussion at the North Central Area Committee?
Well, twice I brought a motion relating to the situation in the Artane Coolock family centre, resource centre, where a person in Whitefield was a very popular coordinator of that centre was dismissed last March by the Board of Management. The majority of that Board of Management was to the centres from that decision. And the City Council had an interest in this situation from a number of points of view. The Council actually owns the building from which this centre operates. The Council funds some of its activities. And now at this point in time there's an elected councillor, Alison Gilliland from the Labour Party, who sits on its interim board. So we have a number of connections with this situation, but I was concerned about the manner of the dismissal. There is an Employment Appeal Tribunal case pending. The unfortunate thing with the Employment Appeal Tribunal, it takes up to 18 months to have your case heard, so it's really with justice delayed in those cases. So I have concerns on that, and where I felt was the non-observance of normal kind of procedures like the right to appeal, within an organisation before you're summarily dismissed. That's an issue. But the other kind of more fundamental issue about how the centre itself is run, and other centres like it, that you have a voluntary board of management, but then in terms of how they're elected and how they're perpetuated in that position, I think is an issue that they have a AGM, so to speak, but then when you look into the articles of association about the AGM, that there's no actual membership, there's no voting membership, or the community doesn't really have an input, because the community, there's been a few meetings convened within the community in support of the dismissed coordinator, and the people are users of that centre, but actually find that they don't have any kind of means of democratically influencing how that centre is run, its employment practices and so on. So that's an issue we've been coming to grips with as well.
Now, this isn't the first case I've come across where similar things have happened on the north side, but are you saying that organisations of this nature, and I'm talking about essentially community or voluntary organisations, effectively are run by, they're not terribly democratic, and they're effectively run by small cabals for whatever objectives?
Well, that's highly loaded language. I mean, what I would say is that you find situations where maybe a community operation may have started out on a purely voluntary basis. Yeah. But over years it could become quite professionalised, and in the case of this centre, they could get significant funding from the Department of Children and Youth Affairs via Cllr, and therefore it becomes professionalised. It has to employ people to do the work, and then it gets used extensively by the community. But if you like, the actual democratic structures of how it's run, the board of management, haven't, if you like, altered or caught up with the reality of the growth, say, of this particular centre. And to my mind, the way around this is that you need to have a kind of for the centres like this, a membership-based structure open to the community, where for, say, a nominal fee, people can be a member if they're users, live in the area, and have your AGM, elect your board of management, and that board of management then is charged with running the affairs, dealing with employment practices. But we don't have that in this case. We don't have it in many cases, but it's problematic here because there's been a contentious dismissal, and the Department of Children and Youth Affairs has actually intervened, and if like an interim board has been appointed, with some statutory appointees, including an elected councillor, an official from Dublin City Council, somebody from the Guards, the HSE, to try and deal with the situation. Now, I'm not happy that they're dealing with the situation the way it needs to be dealt with, because they're trying to make the centre function when effectively there's been a partial boycott by other user groups who support the dismissed coordinator. So there's a lot of conflict going on there, but I think the way forward is to establish a membership structure, and then if people who are the incumbent board are confident of the decisions that they've made along the way, well then they've nothing to fear. The community will vote them back in. But I think you might get a different outcome if you have a democratic setup, the likes of which I just described.
Do you know who's charged with overseeing. I mean, a lot of these organisations would fit into what Fine Gael in the past were calling quangos, in that sense of the word, that their funding is primarily, and I'm talking 90% plus, comes from officials and government sources. Is there any one authority that's charged with overseeing the operations, or is it all over the place depending on the field of operations?
Well, I think it's they are set up as a limited company, to the best of my knowledge. They have articles of association. They obviously don't operate on a for-profit basis, but like, you know, in the whole kind of community and voluntary sector, you have different streams of funding. You know, obviously some organisations would get some kind of private funding, you know, and have their own funding. So, you know, to the best of my knowledge, this centre, its funding is entirely statutory. In the main, as I say, from TUSLA, the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, but as I say, some funding from the City Council as well for some of the activities that are run, you know.
Yeah, the reason why I use the term cabal, Michael, is that other organisations I know on the north side who've been around for quite some time and whose, again, their funding would be 90% plus, they've essentially had the same, you know, if you like, you usually have three core directors, which is a secretary, a chair, and a treasurer. And in some of these organisations, they've essentially had the same people around for about 15 years. You know, that's really getting to me beyond the spirit of what these organisations are about. Do you favour term limits, I suppose, in this instance, Michael? Not in this instance, but as a general principle for community organisations.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily favour term limits in the sense. I think we have to be open to the possibility that some people can be very, very good in their role and have enjoy the appreciation of the community. But I think the key thing is that they put themselves forward for election, you know, on an annual basis, so that, like, if there is a sentiment out there that somebody needs to replace or someone better has come along, that there's a mechanism for the community or the user group to try and influence that. So term limits would be a bit of a crude measure, in my view, but, you know, and there could be aspects of ageism that could creep in, like, you know, because it can discriminate against people by dint of their age and longevity. So, but I just think, you know, straightforward membership structures, you know, and democratic AGMs, I think can actually get what we want out of this.
Something, and again, I was talking to another person about 3 or 4 weeks ago when I was looking into the issue of employment tribunals and so on and so forth, and it struck me that it was very one-sided in the sense that if you wanted to enforce your rights, we take an instance where you say, I was wrong, I felt I was wrongfully dismissed, I want to take it to a tribunal. It seems to me that the onus on the person who's making the claim is very one-sided in the sense that what the person I was dealing with, they suddenly found that they were confronted by a barrister, that there was a whole range of resources pitted against them, and I think at the best they got somebody from HR out of SIPTU. Now, that seemed to me quite a one-sided affair in that, yes, you'll get process, but getting justice in that system, I thought was going to be extremely challenging, is the way I will put it.
Yeah, I think there's a few hurdles confronting people who take a case to the tribunal. I mean, first of all, just to be aware of you have that right. It's not universally kind of known thing amongst workers. Many workers aren't organised in unions, so they find that out. They have to wait a long time to have their case heard. Technically speaking, the burden of proof was on the employer to demonstrate that the dismissal was fair, except in constructive dismissal cases when the burden of proof was on the person taking the case. And then employers, even anti-union employers, kind of come, as you say, armed with kind of HR people from IBEC and the likes, and sometimes legal people. And it's just an irony that in a country where we do not have mandatory trade union recognition, that all the employers are organised in a union of their own, which is IBEC, and that IBEC provides, if you like, union type services to employers in terms of advice and representation.
But I'd expect that in the private enterprise. You would expect that. But in if you like, the community and voluntary sector, I would have expected a somewhat more level playing field. In other words, that hold on, there's an issue here. Let's see what it is. Let's sort it out. Instead of being adversarial the way it is.
Well, I don't know. I worked in Bernardo's in a former life, and I have to say I didn't find it much different from, you know, what you'd get in a private sector employment. You have organisations with their hierarchies and and I think the mindset one encounters in a HR department, I don't think differs really, you know, across the sectors.
Okay, let's move along, Michael. The something that's been in the news a bit was the concept of the right to change. Now, I'm not quite too sure what the right to change means. I gather the Anti-Austerity Alliance are not signing up to this. What can you update us on this one, Michael?
Well, just by way of background, the 6 unions that back the Right to Water campaign, which is obviously a single issue campaign, made an announcement on the 29th of August at the big demonstration that they have initiated this right to change. And basically right to change involves a political programme that was discussed prior to August the 29th at a number of conferences. The political groups, including ourselves, had some limited input into that programme. And then there was a tour of meetings they had around the country where they made presentations to people. And then the various parties associated with the water charges struggle were written to a couple of weeks ago and summoned to a meeting in Unite's offices where basically 3 questions were posed to us, which we were told by the union leaders were questions that were repeatedly coming up at the community-based meetings. One was, do we support the political programme? The second was, will we form a government, a progressive government? And the third one was kind of assuming that the answer to question 2 was yes, like what concrete steps we would take to that end. And the response we gave was, I felt, was positive but qualified, in the sense that we said that we supported the programme in the main, but we had 2 kind of qualifications around the debt and its issues around the North, and some kind of, well, I don't have to digress too much, but there was issues around the North that we raised, North of Ireland that is, in our response, the Good Friday Agreement and so on. And then the second question, we said that we supported the concept of a left government, but we qualified to say that it has to be consistently anti-austerity. And we went into some of the attributes we think such a government should have, and they need to exclude the traditional parties of the establishment. And then in the terms of the third question, we were in favour of transfers to other kind of what we felt were consistently anti-austerity groups, and those that advocate a boycott of the water charge. Okay, but reading between the lines, the negative spin that was put on our response is that we have an issue with making a commitment to form a government with Sinn Féin, from a number of points of view, that we do not think Sinn Féin are consistent in their opposition to austerity, and we evidence that by the role they've played in the Northern administration, where they've stood over £8 million sterling worth of cuts, where they've agreed to a reduction of the public sector in the North by 20,000, albeit through natural wastage. And Sinn Féin ministers have stood over school closures, private finance initiatives, PPPs and so on. And in the South we have a particular issue around their declared and documented openness to do business with Fianna Fáil and Labour, albeit as minority partners in a government. We have a major problem with that. And and that needs to be addressed. What should have happened, in my view, is that we should have been asked purely about our support for the programme, which we would have given with minor qualifications, and then we should have all just contested the elections on that basis about support for basic reforms and see what happened. But a situation was engineered where effectively, we've been excluded now from this process, and we've been kind of under a sustained attack now from Sinn Féin and Sinn Féin apologists. But besides that, there is genuine kind of confusion and disappointment out there as well from people who I accept, who I would have a good relationship with in the area that I represent, who desire a change, see Sinn Féin as a necessary part of that, maybe aren't aware of the qualifications that we have and the reservations we have around Sinn Féin. But we're going to have that dialogue with people and try and convince them of the position we've taken in the coming weeks and months.
I'll put the toughie then to you then, Michael. Do people in the Socialist Party view Sinn Féin as a left-wing party or not as a left-wing party?
Well, the Anti-Austerity Alliance is the broader political project the Socialist Party is affiliated, just to make that clear, and that this was a AAA decision. The AAA steering committee kind of poured over this, and we had an Anti-Austerity Alliance conference a couple of months ago which kind of anticipated these outcomes, so that was where our decisions flow from. No, fundamentally I do not view Sinn Féin as belonging to the left. We accept that they are certainly down here critical of austerity, but we think that the sectarian role they play in the North, the fact that they're based on one community, is a barrier to real change taking place up there. Their willingness to accept money from US multinational donors. They're having a dinner, I think, tomorrow night with in New York. $500 a plate. So
you'd get a good nose for that, wouldn't you?
On the issue of corporation tax, that they're not in favour of raising corporation tax in the South. They are in favour of lowering corporation tax in the North down to the 12.5% we have in the South, a headline figure, which would come at a cost to the Exchequer up there of several million sterling, you know, and that they've been told they can do that on the basis of locating savings from other parts of public expenditure. That is neoliberal stuff. So, you know, there's definite contradictions there, except amongst the ranks of Sinn Féin, rank and file, you know, Sinn Féin members, there will be people who would, you know, genuinely be you know, see themselves of the left and be of the left in their participants in the various struggles and may be active in their trade unions. But in terms of where the leadership is and where they're going, you know, I do not accept that they belong to the left by the internationally recognised kind of understanding of what being left is all about.
Okay. Last but by no means least, Malcolm, because unfortunately we won't have a lot of time. Modular housing, what's your thoughts on that one?
I think it's a false economy. We're told that it will cost an average 100,000 per unit to have one set up, whereas the average cost of building a council home on council owned land will be in the region of 180 grand, according to Dr. Larkin Soar from the DIT.
But isn't there a time lag?
There's a time issue, and we were told that speed was one of the great benefits of modular housing, but now we're told we get 22 before Christmas and then some after that. There's issues around the selection of the locations. I wouldn't stand in the way of any person currently in homeless or in emergency accommodation who wants one of these as a less kind of a desperate form of existing, but it's not a solution, and it won't be temporary as they claim on the basis of the commitments to build, you know, houses and the projected kind of house bills, both public and private, in the coming years, that they'll be with us for a long time, unfortunately, unless, you know, that they actually build the houses in the numbers required.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I know you're going to be spoiled for meetings tonight up in Dublin Bay North. I mean, Renew are having a meeting, I gather, in Donaghmede. The Independent, or whatever Shane Ross's group is, Finian McGrath, is having another meeting up there in Clontarf Castle. If you're quick, you could probably make both of them.
No, well, I won't. The council are having a budget information meeting at 6 o'clock, so I don't know how long that's going to go on for, but that's the meeting I'll be at.
Okay. Michael, unfortunately we've run out of time today. Keep us updated on anything that's happening there. We wish you all the best in G16, assuming that it takes that long. I want to thank, who was it? It was Bernard who was doing the desk to a degree today. I'm Mick Fitz. We'll be back in a week's time. In the meantime, you stay tuned, because coming up after this is Midweek Music Miscellany. You take care.